Hello, my loves. I am Luna.Enchanted. Welcome to Adult Storytime. Today we are going to be reading The Secret History of the World. We are on chapter 4, which is Lucifer, the Light of the World. My Lucifer is lonely. I hope that you will subscribe and stick around, and if you're not caught up on chapters 1 through 3 of The Secret History of the World, you can find them on the Adult Bedtime Stories playlist. And trust me, you do not want to miss out on any of this book. So ring that notification bell as well so that you will never miss a video. And before we get started, I just want to remind you guys, if you have any paranormal stories of your own and you would like to be featured on Paranormal Storytime, send them to this email right there, Luna.Enchanted@yahoo.com. Let's get into it, my loves. A mess there. I'm sure of it. Everybody get comfy. Yeah, comfy. Good. Oh my god, my babies. I just found out that New York is starting their plastic bag ban in stores on March 1st of this year. I did not know this, and I am so proud to hear it. Yay, New York! New York taking the initiative. Yay, New York! Now let's get to our bedtime story. The Secret History of the World by Mark Booth. Chapter 4, Lucifer, the Light of the World, the Apple of Desire, A War in Heaven, the Secrets of the Days of the Week. This chapter is actually really interesting. BT dubs. Creation was reenacted in the Mystery Schools, a drama in 3 acts. The first act dramatized Saturn's oppression of Mother Earth. This was called the Age of Saturn. The second act dramatized the birth of the sun and his protection of Mother Earth. This, the paradise of the flower people, was remembered as the Age of Saturn. During the reenactment of these great events, the candidate for initiation found himself in the middle of what was partly a play with special effects and partly a séance. In an altered state, perhaps drugged and with little ability to distance himself from events, the candidate was guided by the priests on a shaman-like journey through the spirit worlds. That sounds scary as okay. Drama as we know it today would eventually move out of the Greek mystery centers to become public performances, but in the early days of the mystery schools, at least, candidates would never have seen anything like this before. We now come to the third act, the subject of this chapter. At the start of it, there's the momentous event we alluded to at the end of the last chapter. At the start of it, there's the momentous event we alluded to at the end of the last chapter. Earth and sun separate. From now on, the sun's life-giving rays, rather than illuminating it from the inside, shine down upon the earth from the sky. As a result, the earth cools and becomes denser. It becomes less gaseous and more liquid. It shrinks, and the whole of its watery surface is covered by Adam and Eve and their flowery, gently fluttering progeny. Suddenly, at the climax of the third act, the candidate for initiation into the mystery school watching this drama would have caught a whiff of sulfur, maybe even been half blinded by a flash like lightning, as the peaceful pastoral scene was invaded by a glistening alien life form, horrifyingly livid and horned. The picture that was being presented to his imagination was of a snake, seemingly endlessly long, millions of miles of it weaving its way into the cosmos, a snake with a perverse kind of beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God, says Ezekiel 28:13. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and carbuncle, and gold. The candidate for initiation would have watched with horror as it coiled itself ever more tightly around Adam's vegetable trunk. He would have understood that what he was watching was the series of events by which life on Earth moved painfully to the next stage of evolution. Because the story of the serpent intertwined around the tree contains the clearest possible image of the Earth's transition from vegetable to animal life, since the 18th century, when a matter before mind worldview began to take over from the ancient mind before matter worldview, the Church has tried to reconcile the Genesis account of creation with the findings of science. This has been a doomed enterprise because it is based on a modern, anachronistic reading of Genesis. Genesis does not consider evolution objectively as a modern scientist does, piecing together bits of geological, anthropological, and archaeological evidence impartially and objectively evaluated. The story of Genesis is a subjective account of the way humanity evolved, what it felt like. In other words, the story of the entwining of snake and tree is a picture of the formation of the spine and central nervous system, characteristic of animals as it has been retained in the human collective subconscious. Again and again, we will see that the esoteric account is not necessarily inconsistent with the scientific one. As be suggested by the perspective picture, it views the same reality from a different point of view. So, we have a picture of Adam and Eve. That's pretty cool. Just the artwork, by the way. I feel like I have some people watching this like, that's how the devil gets you, the artwork. That's probably true, though. To be honest, I would agree, actually. I feel so old now. Okay. We saw in the last chapter how matter had, in a sense, prepared the ground in which vegetable life could be born. Now, vegetable life, as it were, formed a cradle into which animal life could be born. To put it another way, vegetable life formed a seed bed into which the seeds of animal life fell. This is the beginning of the momentous episode in history called the Fall. The candidate for initiation was made to feel the terrible sense of crisis and danger involved in the fall in a quite literal way. Suddenly, and as if impelled by an earth tremor, he found himself falling down into a black hole pitched into what he quickly discovered to be a snake pit. In the esoteric tradition, the rough-hewn chamber that lies underneath the Great Pyramid at Giza, known as the Chamber of Ordeal, performed just this function. Recent excavations at Baia in Italy, where a system of caves, part natural and part man-made, were believed by the Romans to be the actual entrance to the underworld. He actually revealed the site of the trap-door which would have flung the candidate for initiation down into the snake pit below. So the candidate experienced for himself how Lucifer and his legions infested the whole earth with a plague of glistening serpents. He saw how, according to the secret history, the whole earth began to seethe with primitive animal life. He saw, too, how desire tormented the very ground, making it heave, leaving traces of this torment in excessive rock formations. But why should the translation from vegetable to animal life be marked by such torment? The account of the catastrophe in Genesis emphasizes this tormented aspect in some of the most sonorous phrases on the Old Testament. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow shalt thou bring forth children, and unto Adam he said, Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee. It seems that as a result of the fall, humans have to suffer, to strive, and to die. But why? Wrapped up in this ancient language are truths modern science would recognize. We have already touched on the way plants reproduce by a method called parthenogenesis. A part of the plant falls off and grows into a new plant. This new plant is, in a sense, a continuation of the old one, which therefore, in a sense, does not die. The evolution of animal life and its characteristic method of reproduction, sex, brought deal with it. As soon as hunger and desire were felt, so too were dissatisfaction, frustration, sorrow, and fear. Who is it who tempts Eve? Who is the serpent who inflames the world with desire? We probably all feel we know the answer to this question, but naively. The problem is that those in charge of our spiritual development have kept us at a nursery level of understanding. So there's a picture here. It says Loki, the Norse equivalent to Lucifer, is usually portrayed as a beautiful and fiery god, but also evil, quick-witted, and cunning. 19th century illustration by R. Savage. That is Loki. We began to see in the last chapter how the Church has covered up its astronomical roots, how the beginning of Genesis contains hidden within its stories of the same gods of the planets we know from other, more primitive religions, the god Saturn, the earth goddess, and the sun goddess. As we now move further into the Genesis account of history, we can see again how this covering up of astronomical roots, the radical monotheism of the modern church, can stop us from understanding clearly what the ancient text is trying to tell us. Most people would naturally assume that Christianity allows the experience of only one devil, the devil. In other words, that Satan and Lucifer are the same entity. In fact, we need only a quick, fresh look at the text to see that the authors of the Bible intended something quite different. Again, this is something maybe biblical scholars accept, but which hasn't filtered down to congregations. We have seen that Satan, the Dark Lord, the agent of materialism, is to be identified with the god of the planet Saturn in Greek and Roman mythology. Is Lucifer the snake, the tempter, who inflames humanity with animal desire, also to be identified with Saturn, or perhaps with a different planet? There is a vast erudite body of literature comparing biblical texts to older and contemporary texts from neighboring cultures, which shows that the two main representatives of evil in the Bible, Satan and Lucifer, are not the same entity. Fortunately, we do not need to immerse ourselves in this literature because there is a quite explicit statement in the Bible itself. Isaiah 14:12. How thou art fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. The morning star is of course Venus. The Bible therefore identifies Lucifer with the planet Venus. So there's also a picture right there that says the correlation between Lucifer and Venus can also be seen in the mythology of the Americas, where he appears in the figure of the horned and feathered snake god Quetzalcoatl. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing that butcheredly, but that is the picture. It might be at first seem counterintuitive to equate the goddess of Venus in Greece and Rome, Aphrodite, to the Greeks with Lucifer in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Venus Aphrodite is female and seems more life-enhancing. but in reality there are key points of similarity. Both Lucifer and Venus Aphrodite are bound up with animal desire and sexuality. The apple is the fruit associated with both. Lucifer tempts Eve with an apple, whilst Paris hands Venus an apple in a gesture that precipitates the abduction of Helen in the Great War of the ancient world. The apple is universally the fruit of Venus, because if you slice an apple in two, the path that Venus traces in the sky over a 40-year period is described there as a five-pointed star, pinpointed by the position of the pips. Lucifer and Venus are also ambiguous figures. Lucifer is evil, but he is a necessary evil. Without Lucifer's intervention, proto-humanity would not have evolved beyond a vegetative form of life. As a result of Lucifer's intervention in history, we are animated, both in the sense that we can move about the surface of the planet, and also in the sense that we are moved by desire. An animal has a conscious awareness of itself as a distant entity that is denied to plants. To say that Adam and Eve knew they were naked is to say that they became aware that they had bodies. Many beautiful representations of Venus have come down to us from the ancient world, but there were terrifying representations too. Behind the image of a woman of matchless beauty lurked the terrifying serpent woman. So here's another picture. Don't you love how this book has so many pictures? And that is, oh, I see a triangle. That's what we've been looking for, right? And the snake. Just kidding. The cover of this book is not connected because I was reading it in the bathtub and dropped it one too many times, I guess you could say. As a result, when it dried, the cover broke off. And it was used, so that didn't help it. So that picture is the snake, sometimes found coiled round the body of the goddess, was called the minister of the goddess by the Greeks. In order to delve deeper into this ambiguity and to understand better the next great event in the secret history of the world, we now turn to an early German version of Venus-Lucifer tradition. It appeared in a medieval poetry and would enter the mainstream of world literature when it was taken up and adapted by Wolfram von Eschenbach in Percival. See, Lucifer, there he is. If there are still master priests, then you know well that I am saying the truth. Saint Michael saw God's anger. He took Lucifer's crown from his head in such a way that the stone jumped out of it, which on earth became Percival's stone. To understand. The influence of Venus brought a paradox, tricky quality to the heart of the universe. In other words, delusion entered the world. Lucifer endowed matter with a glamour that would dazzle humankind and blind people to higher truths. Why is it that the way forward sometimes looks like the way backwards? Why is it that the things we most ought not to do looks almost indisguisable from the things we ought to do? In my heart of hearts, I know what I ought to do, but I have another alien element intertwined inside me that wants to lead me astray. The Lucifer element is infused into my very physiology. Desire and delusion combine in me dangerously. Because of Lucifer's influence, the good that I would do, I not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. Romans 7:19. St. Paul, who, as we shall see, was an initiate of the mystery tradition, is saying that part of me always knows what is right, but that it is often overruled by a part that is in thrall with Lucifer. Modern science neglects questions like, how did delusion come into the world, or imagination, or willpower? But to the ancients delusion, imagination, and will were almost the greatest forces in the universe. Living out there in three-dimensional space, as well as in our own minds, For them, the history of creation was at its center, an account of how these things came to be. Friedrich Nietzsche said, "Unless you have chaos inside you, you cannot give birth to a dancing star." Humans would never have been able to become freely creative, brave, or loving if they had not been able to make mistakes, to see things as other than they are, and to believe things to be other than they are. Because of Lucifer, it is the case that we do not always believe in proportion to the evidence. We can often believe what we want to believe. For instance, the life of someone we know can appear a miserable failure or a heartwarming success, depending on how we choose to look at it, whether good-heartedly or mean-spiritedly. And when the harsh fire of primeval sulfur burns in the pit of our stomachs, it is difficult for us to choose to be good-hearted. When in the very beginning the earth goddess was attacked by the god of Saturn, the young sun god arrived to protect her, and fighting a great battle in heaven, he defeated Saturn. The candidate for initiation, who was being shown the secret history of the world, had therefore already watched one great battle. He now had to watch another one, in which the enemy was the great snake that had slithered into paradise in order to corrupt it. Who was to be the new champion to fight this second battle? As with the Church's conflation of Satan and Lucifer, in order to disguise its astronomical roots, we must now disentangle another deliberately created confusion. In the early chapters of Genesis telling the story of creation, the word usually translated as God is, as we have seen, Elohim. Later, Genesis ceases to refer to Elohim, and instead, the word usually translated as God is Jehovah. Biblical scholars working outside the esoteric tradition have tended to explain what appears to them as two different names for the same God as the result of two different literary standards, the Elohim strand and the Jehovah strand, probably dating from different periods and woven together by a later redactor. However, scholars working with the esoteric tradition have a much simpler explanation. Elohim and Jehovah are not different names for the same entity, but different entities. Elohim is, as we have seen, a collective name for the seven spirits working together as the god of the sun, while Jehovah came into being when one of these seven broke away to defend the earth from Venus. In order to discover Jehovah's true astronomical identity, we must look again at the iconography of his opponent Venus. We must also continue to bear in mind that for the ancients the history of the origins of the cosmos was as much about how human experience was put together, how experience gained its characteristic structure, as it was about how the physical universe was put together. In other words, it was as much about the principles of human nature as about the laws of the natural world. Human nature is so formed that any power I may have to resist my animal desires, indeed what stops me from becoming a mere animal, derives from my capacity for thought and reflection. Venus was traditionally depicted holding a mirror, but not out of vanity, as is nowadays supposed. The mirror was a symbol of the power of reflection to modify desire. Then there's a picture of the medieval depiction of Jehovah as a war god. Right on. For straws, save the ocean life. The god of reflection was the god of the great reflector in the sky, the moon. In all ancient cultures, the moon regulated not only fertility but thought. In fact, the initiate priests believed that, in order to create the conditions in which human thought would be possible, the cosmos had to arrange itself in a particular way. In order for human reflection to be possible, the sun and the moon had to arrange themselves in the sky so that the moon reflected the light of the sun down to earth. They also believed that this arrangement in the sky had to be reproduced on a smaller scale inside the human head. There, the pineal gland represents the sun, and the moony gland, which could modify and reflect on the visions that the pineal gland received from the spirit world, was the. This might seem one of the madder things that anyone has ever believed, but to the ancients it corresponded to their everyday lived experience. They tracked small changes in their consciousness, which seemed to them to mutate with the changing positions of the sun and moon. Readers are invited to check their own experience to see whether their dreams are more vivid when the moon is big and full. If you observe oysters in a tray for a month, you will see that they wax and wane with the moon. Modern science has confirmed that the pituitary gland behaves like an oyster. The god of the moon would become known to the Hebrews as Jehovah, and to the Muslims as Allah, the great god of thou shalt not. So at the climax of this great cosmic drama of creation, with the earth in danger of becoming a living hell, a new force arose to meet Lucifer. Just as the seven Elohim had acted to hold Saturn, Satan in check, now one of these seven broke away to become the god of the moon, and from there directed operations to hold Venus Lucifer in check. This great cosmic battle against Venus was remembered in cultures around the world. For example, in the story of Krishna's battle with the snake demon Kalia, in Apollo's battle with the python, and of Perseus, one of whose attributes was a mirror shield, combating the sexually ravenous dragon that threatened Andromeda. The Jehovah of the Old Testament is a jealous, angry, and warlike God. In Hebrew tradition, Jehovah's forces are led by Archangel Michael. As the book of Revelation has it, and there was a war in the heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought against his angels. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, which deceived the whole world, he was cast out into the earth. We have seen then that in the third great act of the drama of creation, the god of the moon won a great victory. So began the era of the moon. The first three epochs of the cosmos, the mineral, vegetable, and animal eras, Saturn Day, Sun Day, and Moon Day, are remembered in the names of the first 3 days of the week. These days of the week are named after these three heavenly bodies in this particular order for this reason alone. Cool. So there's another picture that says, here we see a sun god's battle against a snake or dragon in an engraving taken from the painting by Raphael. So that's pretty cool, right? Saturn Day, Sunday, and Moon Day. And that's the end of the chapter, which I did not expect, actually. So next time that we read The Secret History of the World on Adult Bedtime Stories, we will be reading Chapter 5, The Gods Who Loved Women. So make sure you ring that notification bell so that you don't miss it. Of course, on the next Adult Bedtime Stories, though, I will probably be reading you Dr. Joe Dispenza's Survival versus Creation, because these two books are both equally popular, so I want to try to keep all of my little sub babies happy. So be sure to ring that notification bell so that you don't miss either of those. Hit that subscribe button if you are not already subscribed. Comment below which book is your favorite on Adult Bedtime Stories, because the books that get commented are the books that get priorities. Feel free to also comment any other books that you have not seen yet that you would like to see on Adult Bedtime Stories. And hit that big thumbs up button for me because it makes my heart super happy. Thank you so much, guys. And remember to send your paranormal stories to Luna.Enchanted at yahoo.com so that we can do paranormal story time. I already have a couple and I'm very excited, but I don't have so many that yours will not be guaranteed to get featured if you send it soon. That is all. Thank you so much. And remember Be kind to everybody in your everyday life, strangers, loved ones, everybody, anybody. Remember, if it harms none, do what you will. Thanks, guys.